While traveling through Europe, a professor had his parking spot secretly rented out by the HOA president. Upon returning, he found a strange car in his space and discovered she had pocketed all the money. What began as a simple abuse of power turned out to be a years-long scheme. This is a story of courage, justice, and overcoming challenges that transformed a timid man into a hero for his condo community. Get ready for an emotional journey. Hit that like button and comment where you're tuning in from. Do you know what it's like to plan a dream trip for years, organize every tiny detail, and then come home to find out your HOA president turned your apartment situation into her private business? Well, my friend, welcome to my personal nightmare. A nightmare named Mrs. Peterson, the HOA president from hell. Let's start from the beginning because this story deserves to be told from the start, with all the absurdities properly detailed. My name is Charles. I've been a university professor for over 20 years, the kind who still believes education can change lives. Naive, I know. But if you think my naivete is limited to the classroom, just wait until you hear what happened in my condo building. For 2 decades, I saved every possible penny to fulfill my big dream, visiting my sister who has lived in Europe for years, a 3-month sabbatical, planned with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. I left my apartment, spotless, my plants with the neighbor, bills on autopay, and notified the HOA president about my extended absence. I even left an emergency contact in case something extraordinary happened. Extraordinary, you understand. A fire, a flood, the zombie apocalypse. Not, I'm going to rent out your parking spot, because I felt like it. The trip was wonderful, the kind that renews the soul. I saw places I'd only seen in photographs, tasted foods with unpronounceable names, and had long conversations with my sister about how life took us down such different paths. I returned to the States reinvigorated, full of stories to tell, photos to show, gifts to distribute. Just imagine my face when, after a 12-hour flight and an expensive cab ride from the airport, I arrive at my building and find an unfamiliar car parked in my spot. At that moment, I confess, I thought, it must be a mistake. Someone new in the building who doesn't know the assigned spots. After all, 3 months is enough time for new residents to arrive, right? With the patience I developed after decades of teaching students who would rather be anywhere else but my class, I took a deep breath and went looking for the HOA president. Mrs. Peterson, the same woman who has managed the condo for over 10 years, that little old lady with perfectly dyed brown hair. Who does she think she's fooling? Glasses perched on the tip of her nose, and a smile I now know is phonier than a $3 bill. Mrs. Peterson, I called out as I saw her exiting the elevator with her pet dog, a neurotic miniature pinscher named Duke, who looks more like a rat with anger management issues. There's a car in my spot. I just got back from my trip and can't park. And then, my dear friend, comes the part you won't believe. As casually as someone commenting on the weather, she tells me, "Oh, Charles, I rented out your spot during your absence. It would have been a waste to leave it empty for so long, don't you think? Mr. Henderson from 302 needed an extra space for his son's new car." I felt my jaw hit the basement floor. Rent out my spot, without my permission, without even consulting me. But wait, there's more. When I asked about the money from this rental, Mrs. Peterson simply shrugged and said, "Consider it an administrative fee for the service provided." Administrative fee? What service provided? Stealing my property and benefiting from it. At that moment, I felt heat rise up my neck. My ears turned red, and I almost lost the composure I've maintained for 52 years. But you know that feeling of confronting someone in a position of authority, the one that makes us swallow our words even when we're right. Well, I've carried that block since childhood. My parents were the children should be seen and not heard, and respect your elders even when they're wrong type. I grew up believing that questioning authority was practically a cardinal sin. And there I was, a grown man, a respected professor, trembling like a leaf before a 70-year-old woman with a demonic min pin in her arms. "Mrs. Peterson, you can't rent out my spot without my permission." "That's illegal," I said, my voice thinner than intended, almost a whisper. "Illegal? Don't be dramatic, Charles. I've been running this building since you were in diapers. I know what I'm doing. Besides, it's already done. The agreement with Mr. Henderson is for 6 months. 6 months, I nearly choked on my own saliva. But I'm back now, I need my spot. Oh, just use one of the visitor spots for now. It's only 3 more months, time flies, she said, while Duke stared at me with his beady little eyes, probably plotting how to attack my ankles when I was distracted. That night, I parked on the street, 2 blocks away from my own building. I carried my suitcases under an annoying drizzle, the kind that isn't heavy enough to justify a cab, but guarantees you arrive home looking like a freshly bathed poodle. Upon entering my apartment, exhausted and defeated, I noticed something strange. Things weren't exactly as I left them. My collection of city mugs, which I keep in alphabetical order, yes, I'm that kind of person, was out of order. Boston came before Barcelona. Unacceptable. I searched the apartment, increasingly disturbed. My home office, usually impeccably organized, showed signs of use. The paper in the printer was in a different position. My pencil holder, slightly misaligned. And then the final blow. My drawer of personal documents, which I keep locked, was unlocked. The key hidden behind a picture frame was in the lock. Someone had been in my apartment during my absence. And I immediately suspected who. The next morning, determined not to let this situation continue, I knocked on the door of 302. If Mrs. Peterson wouldn't resolve it, I'd talk directly to Mr. Henderson. A tall, bald man with a mustache that seemed to have a life of its own answered. "Good morning, I'm Charles from 507. I came to talk about the parking spot you're using." He looked at me confused. "Parking spot? What parking spot?" "My spot. Mrs. Peterson told me she rented it to you while I was traveling." Mr. Henderson frowned, looking genuinely surprised. "I haven't rented any spot, my friend. I have my own spot, and my son doesn't even live with me anymore. He sold his car 6 months ago when he moved to Portland." The mystery deepened. If it wasn't Mr. Henderson who was using my spot, and why would Mrs. Peterson lie about it? I went down to the garage, determined to find out who the mysterious driver was. The car was still there, a gleaming Mercedes that surely cost more than my annual professor's salary. I noted the license plate and, using my university contacts, sometimes teaching the children of police captains has its perks, discovered the vehicle belonged to a Richard Mendez, who didn't even live in the building. Armed with this information, I went looking for Mrs. Peterson again. This time I wouldn't be that timid, hesitant professor. I would be Charles, the parking spot avenger. "Mrs. Peterson, can we talk about my parking spot? The one you said you rented to Mr. Henderson from 302. I spoke with a confidence I didn't feel, but I faked it magnificently. "Of course, Charles, what's wrong?" she replied, as if she didn't know exactly what I had discovered. "Well, I spoke with Mr. Henderson, and he knows nothing about renting my spot. Interestingly, the car parked there belongs to a Richard Mendez, who isn't even a resident of this building." Mrs. Peterson's smile faltered for an instant, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, there must be some misunderstanding. Perhaps I confused the names. Or perhaps you deliberately lied. You rented my spot to a stranger and kept the money, and there's more. Someone entered my apartment during my absence. Do you happen to know anything about that?" The min pin started barking frantically, as if programmed to intervene whenever its owner found herself in compromising situations. Checking on vacant apartments is part of my duties as HOA president. It's a security measure. As for the spot, you weren't using it anyway, and the HOA needs extra funds. But the money didn't go to the HOA, did it? You mentioned an administrative fee, remember? For the first time, I saw Mrs. Peterson look uncomfortable. Her usually impassive face showed a slight flush. "Charles, you're being ungrateful. I take care of this building as if it were my own home. A small token of appreciation for my hard work isn't too much to ask." I was about to respond when a female voice sounded behind me. "Excuse the interruption, but I couldn't help overhearing. What you're describing sounds like embezzlement, and entering an apartment without authorization constitutes unlawful entry." I turned and saw a woman about 60 years old, with short grey hair and upright posture, and a gaze that seemed to pierce through walls. She extended her hand. "Margaret Davis, new resident in 402, retired lawyer." At that moment I knew I had found an ally, and that the battle against Mrs. Peterson was just beginning. The following weeks were a real detective job. Margaret and I became an unlikely duo, united by the cause of condo justice. We discovered that Mrs. Peterson's scheme went far beyond my parking spot. She rented out the party room without recording the income in the HOA accounts, charged new residents extra fees for services that should have been free, and even rented out temporarily vacant apartments to tourists. A true secret Airbnb operation. How did nobody notice this before? I asked Margaret as we reviewed old HOA documents in my apartment. People like Mrs. Peterson thrive on collective apathy, she replied, adjusting her reading glasses. Most people prefer not to get involved, not to create conflict, especially with someone who's been in power for so long. Margaret was right. Our condo community was like a small medieval fiefdom with Mrs. Peterson as the feudal lord and all of us, her obedient serfs. The HOA meetings, which should have been a democratic space, were mere formalities. The real decisions were made at the infamous weekly coffee clatch Mrs. Peterson hosted for the older residents, a closed circle I was never invited to, despite living there for 8 years. At the end of the first month after my return, I still hadn't recovered my parking spot, but I had made significant progress. We managed to access the HOA's accounting books, or at least the official versions, and found alarming discrepancies. Expenses without receipts, payments to phantom companies, and most suspiciously, revenue figures far below what they should be, considering all the common areas that were regularly rented out. It was during the traditional annual summer barbecue organized by Mrs. Peterson with pomp and circumstance that we had our first major breakthrough. While serving myself some punch, too weak by the way, I overheard a conversation between two long-time residents. Of course, nobody questions her decisions. "Do you think the nephew would go against his own aunt?" said one. "Exactly. Being the board president while your aunt is the HOA president is an unbeatable combination. The Peterson family has run this building for generations," replied the other. I almost choked on the punch. Arthur Peterson, our board president, was Mrs. Peterson's nephew. How had this information never been disclosed? Clearly there was an obvious conflict of interest. Now we understood why the irregularities were never questioned in meetings. The person responsible for oversight was compromised by family ties. Armed with this new information, I continued my investigation with even more vigor. By the third month, when I'd already compiled a considerable dossier on Mrs. Peterson's activities, she counterattacked. Suddenly, rumors began circulating. In the building, Charles was planning to sell his apartment. Charles just wanted to depreciate the condo's value to get a discount on his fees. Charles was a troublemaker who never participated in community activities. This last accusation was particularly ironic, considering I had tried to join committees and working groups several times, only to be subtly excluded by Mrs. Peterson. "Oh, Charles, you already work so hard at the university. We don't want to overburden you." The rumors had an effect. Neighbors who used to greet me cordially now avoided eye contact in the elevator. I was removed from the condo's WhatsApp group without warning. Even the doorman, Jim, who had always been friendly, now treated me coldly. "Don't worry," Margaret said when I vented about my growing isolation. "This is typical of people like Beverly. When they feel threatened, they resort to slander. It means we're on the right track." The game changer came in the 4th month, when Margaret, investigating old city records, discovered something explosive. Mrs. Peterson's last election had occurred at a meeting without sufficient quorum. Technically, she hadn't been the legitimate HOA president for 3 years. "This changes everything," I exclaimed, feeling the kind of excitement I usually reserve for significant academic discoveries. "We can question every decision she's made during this period." "Easy does it, Professor," Margaret replied with her usual pragmatism. "It's valuable information, but we need to use it strategically. Beverly has powerful allies in the building, including the board itself. If we act rashly, she might manipulate things in her favor again." I reluctantly agreed. Once again, my patience would be tested. We continued gathering evidence, now focusing specifically on the last 3 years of irregular management. Our big break came unexpectedly in the 5th month, when a severe storm caused leaks in several apartments, including mine. Mrs. Peterson's response to the disaster was revealing. Instead of prioritizing urgent repairs to the affected structures, she directed HOA funds towards renovating the swimming pool. an amenity rarely used by most residents, but frequently enjoyed by her nephew and his friends on weekends. This arbitrary decision finally sparked outrage among other residents. People who had previously avoided taking sides now openly expressed their frustration. It was in this climate of general discontent that we organized an informal meeting in Margaret's apartment. The problem is that even with all this evidence, the bylaws now require a qualified majority of 75% to remove the HOA president, explained a resident who worked as an accountant. Since when? I asked, surprised. Since the last revision of the bylaws approved about 3 months ago while you were traveling. A chill ran down my spine. 3 months ago, I was in Europe. Mrs. Peterson had conveniently approved a change in the bylaws that made her removal practically impossible, considering that at least 25% of the apartments belonged to family members or close allies. I almost gave up at that moment. It seemed Mrs. Peterson had thought of everything, closing off all legal avenues to challenge her. That's when Margaret, with the look of someone who had just found the final piece of a puzzle, said, "Wait, how was this bylaw amendment approved? Was there a specific meeting? Was it officially recorded with the county?" The accountant frowned. "Now that you mention it, it was all very rushed. Mrs. Peterson just presented the new bylaws as a technical adjustment that didn't require a formal vote." "And do we have the old version of the bylaws?" asked Margaret. "I have a copy at home," the accountant replied. "Excellent. If the amendment didn't follow legal procedures, we can challenge it. The original bylaws are still valid." It was like seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe there was still hope. In the last week of that month, we had an even bigger surprise. I was parking on the street, since my spot was still occupied by the mysterious Mercedes, when a man approached hesitantly. "Professor Charles, can we talk privately?" He identified himself as Richard Mendez, the owner of the car occupying my spot. To my surprise, he wasn't just some stranger, but the nephew of the former HOA president who had been mysteriously pushed out years ago after starting an investigation into financial irregularities. "I have something that might help your cause," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside, I found payment receipts made out to Mrs. Peterson for the use of my spot. Amounts much higher than reasonable and, more importantly, much higher than she had implied receiving. It totaled nearly $2,500. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, suspicious. "My uncle tried to do what you're doing now. He ended up being slandered, publicly humiliated, and forced to move out. I never forgave what they did to him. When I heard you were investigating Beverly, I decided to help. I just ask for discretion. I can't get involved openly." This secret meeting was the final catalyst. With Richard's receipts, the discovery of the irregular election, evidence of the improper bylaw amendment, and records of questionable spending, we finally had a solid case against Mrs. Peterson. The climax of our saga occurred at the annual general meeting in the 6th month after my return. The community room was packed. We had never seen such turnout. Even residents who usually sent proxies attended in person, alerted to the importance of the meeting. Mrs. Peterson presided over the session with her usual confidence, interspersing administrative updates with praise for her own management. When it came time for new business, I asked for the floor. "I'll be brief," I began, feeling my heart race. Confronting authority figures was still difficult for me, but indignation now outweighed fear. I would like to raise some issues regarding the management of our condo association. "Charles, if this is about your parking spot again, we can discuss it privately later," Mrs. Peterson interrupted, trying to silence me. "It's not just about my spot, although that's a good starting point," I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. "It's about a systematic pattern of administrative and financial irregularities that affect all of us." A murmur went through the room. Mrs. Peterson visibly stiffened, while her nephew, the board president, nervously glanced at his phone as if expecting an urgent call. With Margaret's help, who had prepared a flawless presentation, we methodically laid out every piece of evidence. The undeclared rentals, the unauthorized entry into apartments, the misappropriation of funds, the irregular election, the improper bylaw amendment. With each new revelation, the faces of those present shifted between surprise, outrage, and finally, determination. When we presented the receipts provided by Richard Mendez without revealing his identity, showing that Mrs. Peterson had received almost $2,500 for renting out my spot, money that never entered the HOA coffers. The silence was deafening. "This is absurd," Mrs. Peterson finally exploded. "These are baseless accusations from a problem resident who never fit in with our rules. If they are baseless, you won't mind if we conduct an external audit of the accounts, correct?" Margaret asked softly. "We don't have the budget for that," the nephew president quickly intervened. "I'll offer to pay for the audit," said a voice from the back. It was Mrs. Gable, the oldest resident in the building, usually silent in meetings. "I want to know where the money went that should have fixed the roof over my apartment, which has been leaking for 3 years." Other residents spoke up, sharing similar experiences. Unexplained extra fees, promised services never delivered, preferential treatment for some residents. It was as if a dam had broken. Years of pent-up frustration now flowed freely. The meeting, scheduled for 2 hours, stretched to nearly 5. In the end, we voted for the immediate removal of Mrs. Peterson and the entire board, following the original bylaws, which required only a simple majority, for hiring an independent auditing firm, and for electing a provisional committee to manage the condo until the next special meeting. To my surprise and dismay, I was elected president of this transitional committee, a position I never wanted and that threatened to compromise my meticulously planned routine and time dedicated to academic research. "It doesn't have to be permanent," Margaret comforted me after the meeting. "It's just until we organize a new transparent election. Besides, you've earned everyone's respect. Your leadership is important right now." Reluctantly, I accepted the temporary role. In the following weeks, with the help of Margaret and other engaged residents, we began to unravel the true extent of Mrs. Peterson's misappropriations. The audit revealed a situation even worse than we had imagined. Over 10 years, we estimated that at least $300,000 had been diverted from the HOA's funds. Mrs. Peterson, predictably, moved out of the building before the audit was even completed, taking her demonic min pin with her and leaving behind a pile of administrative and structural problems that would take months to resolve. The special meeting to elect the new administration, held 2 months later, turned into a true community celebration. Mrs. Gable brought her famous homemade cookies, other residents contributed drinks and snacks, and for the first time since I moved into the building, I felt like we were truly building a community. To my relief, a professional management company was hired to handle the day-to-day operations of the condo, freeing me up to return to my academic routine. I was elected to the finance committee, a position that allowed me to keep an eye on the accounts without overly compromising my time. As for my parking spot, I got it back the day after the meeting that removed Mrs. Peterson. Richard Mendez, in a gesture of goodwill, not only removed his car immediately, but also insisted on reimbursing me for the time he used it, arguing he had paid in good faith, believing the money was being passed on to the owner. 6 months after that fateful meeting, our condo building is practically unrecognizable. The common areas are well maintained, structural problems have finally been repaired, and there's unprecedented transparency in the management of resources. More importantly, we recovered the sense of community that had been progressively eroded during Mrs. Peterson's reign of terror. Sometimes, when I park my car in my rightful spot, I remember how it all started and can't help but smile. Who knew that the usurpation of a parking space would trigger a complete condo revolution? As a professor, I always taught my students the importance of persistence, seeking truth, and the courage to question authority when necessary. Ironically, it took a corrupt HOA president, a stolen parking spot, and a retired lawyer to make me apply those lessons in my own life. And if there's one thing I learned from this whole experience, it's that it's never too late to overcome our deepest fears. It took me over 50 years to finally face my dread of confronting authority figures. It was worth every moment of anxiety, every sleepless night, every uncomfortable confrontation. Oh, and in case you're wondering about Duke, the demonic min pin, I heard he bit Mrs. Peterson's new neighbor on the ankle the very first day after they moved. Some things never change, right? As for me, I'm planning my next trip, 3 months in Asia. This time I'll leave explicit instructions regarding my parking spot, for owner's use only. Violators will be towed at their own expense. No, not even the HOA president can rent it out. Yes, I'm serious. Sometimes a clear sign is all we need to avoid trouble. That and a vigilant, transparent, and engaged community. Because in the end, evil thrives when good people remain silent. And I most definitely have learned not to be silent anymore.